let's jump right in. Picture this. You're standing on the bank of the Salinas River in California. It's a blistering, unforgiving 1930s afternoon. The heat is just hanging heavy in the air. The path is beaten hard. Today, we're unpacking the first 3 chapters of John Steinbeck's absolute classic, Of Mice and Men. We're going to tear right into the deep psychological complexities here, the crushing weight of social isolation, and really look at how survival fundamentally rewires a person's morality. Now, you might be wondering, why does a story about a 1930s ranch even matter today? Well, we're diving into this specific setting because it brilliantly and brutally forces us to question the intrinsic value of human life. It asks us, how do we measure a person's worth when society demands tight, standardized usefulness? It totally transcends its era to show us exactly what happens when people we care about deeply, well, they just don't fit into the neat little boxes the world demands. Which brings us to our first core theme. Section 1, the micro, the paradox of companionship. Stepping out of the brush and into that clearing by the river, we immediately meet 2 men who represent an absolute masterclass in contrasts, both physically and psychologically, before a single word is even spoken. First, there's George. He's small, with sharp, really defined features. He acts as the rational guide, constantly scanning the horizon for danger. And walking right behind him is his total opposite, Lenny. Lenny is a massive man with a shapeless face, dragging his feet almost like a bear. He operates entirely on immediate sensory impulse, literally flinging himself down to drink from a scummy pool like a horse. And that actually perfectly illustrates Lenny's internal mechanism. We quickly find out he's carrying a dead mouse in his pocket simply because he likes to pet soft things with his thumb. There's absolutely no malice in him, but his gentle intentions result in destruction purely because he can't calibrate his own immense physical power. And George? George is exhausted trying to manage this well-intentioned force of nature. It's kind of like a man straining to hold on to the tether of a massive hot air balloon in the middle of a windstorm. Driven to the breaking point by this relentless responsibility, George finally just erupts by the campfire. He lays out his vision for an easy, isolated life. He wishes he could just keep his $50 at the end of the month, go to a cat house, drink a whole gallon of whiskey, and play pool without constantly worrying. Basically, he's craving the statered, completely lonely life of a typical migrant worker. But here's a question we really have to ask ourselves. Would George actually be better off without Lenny? This hits on the defining paradox of their whole relationship. Logistically, yeah, for sure, George's life would be effortlessly simple. But psychologically, George would be totally lost. He needs Lenny just as desperately as Lenny needs him if they're going to survive the crushing isolation of this environment. So, to mend the tension after his outburst, they shared this rhythmic ritual, reciting it almost like a liturgy. It's the dream of the farm. Someday, we're going to get a little house and a couple of acres and live off the fat of the land, tending the rabbits. This dream acts as George's tangible anchor. It gives him a real reason to keep going, basically preventing him from becoming just another cynical, hardened ranch hand. But they can't stay by that quiet river forever. Real life calls. And that takes us to Section 2, the macro, a predatory ecosystem. As they arrive at the ranch in Chapter 2, the open sky vanishes. We are dropped straight into this claustrophobic, hyper-competitive, deeply Darwinian bunkhouse where you literally have to fight for basic dignity. And what's really fascinating here is the reaction from the boss. He notices George doing all the talking for Lenny and immediately gets suspicious. He flat out accuses George of stealing Lenny's pay, saying, "I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy." The boss is completely incapable of comprehending altruism. It forces George to invent a fake traumatic brain injury story just to justify why they even care about each other. So the crucial takeaway here is that this ranch operates like a deeply alienated microcosm. Honestly, very much like a cutthroat modern gig economy. Extreme isolation isn't just common, it's the enforced norm. Every man is essentially an independent contractor fighting for a meager paycheck. In a world like that, if someone helps you out for free, empathy looks exactly like a manipulative trick to steal your shift. Now, to understand the hierarchy of this predatory space, we meet Old Candy, who is a swamper. A swamper is a bunkhouse cleaner, usually older or disabled, representing the vulnerable bottom tier of the ranch hierarchy. Candy gives George some crucial context about the ranch's main threat, a guy named Curly. Curly's the boss's son. He's a lightweight boxer with a massive Napoleonic complex, and he's constantly targeting larger men just to prove his dominance. Right on his heels is Curly's profoundly lonely wife, who, by the way, doesn't even get a name in the text. George takes one look at her desperate need for attention and instantly recognizes her as a catastrophic danger, harshly calling her jailbait. Recognizing the extreme volatility of both Curly and his wife, George explicitly sets a rule. If trouble strikes, Lenny must run and hide in the brush by the river. No exceptions. The tension on this ranch is thick, leading us straight into Section 3, the rules of the game, the brutal law of survival. Moving into Chapter 3, we start to see exactly how these men survive in such a pressure cooker. George has been carrying this immense psychological load, and he finally unspools the truth to the moral compass of the ranch, a man named Slim. Slim is the jerk-line skinner, meaning he's the lead driver of the mule teams. Because of the immense skill that job requires, Slim sits at the absolute peak of the working hierarchy, treated with a calm, almost godlike reverence. George confesses to Slim the real reason they had to flee a lynch mob at their last job in a town called Weed. He breaks down the terrifying mechanical nature of Lenny's danger, and it basically happens in 3 distinct steps. First, sensory desire. Lenny innocently reached out to touch a girl's soft red dress. Second, sudden panic when she screamed. And third, an unbreakable destructive grip. Lenny's brain just short-circuits and his joints physically lock up until George literally hits him with a fence picket. And while George is explaining this, there's this agonizing subplot playing out right next to them in the bunkhouse. A thick-bodied worker named Carlson is relentlessly pressuring old Candy to let him take Candy's blind, aging, and stinking sheepdog outside to shoot it in the back of the head. Carlson is arguing for this purely out of cold, hard pragmatism, simply because the dog is no longer useful. This moment brilliantly illustrates the dark underbelly of the ranch. It's the unbreakable law. Weakness is a contagion. When Slim silently sanctions the dog's execution, it establishes a truly terrifying reality. If you can no longer pull your weight, your right to exist is revoked. It mirrors that modern anxiety we all feel about aging out of relevancy in a fast-paced industry, right? But here it's amplified to a matter of literal life or death. But just as this brutal reality sets in, casting a chilling shadow over Lenny's mental vulnerabilities, we shift to Section 4, the collision. The dream materializes. The ultimate escape route unexpectedly opens up. $600. That is the exact price of the dream farm. Old Candy, who is missing a hand and totally terrified of his impending obsolescence, overhears and offers George his $350 life savings. Mathematically, combined with their upcoming pay, this completely turns their mythological dream into a tangible, logistical reality. I mean, they actually have the money. But this, being Steinbeck, he doesn't let them have it for long. Right at this absolute highest emotional peak, a publicly humiliated Curly bursts into the bunkhouse. He is frantically looking for a physical target to reassert his dominance. He spots Lenny, who is completely oblivious, just sitting there smiling about the dream of the farm, and Curly viciously attacks him. Initially, Lenny just absorbs the brutal beating. He's terrified to fight back because he desperately wants to protect the dream. But once George realizes Curly is not going to stop and orders Lenny to fight back, Lenny's uncontrollable behavioral pattern locks right in. From the harmless impulse with the mouse to the escalating panic in Weed, it all culminates right here. Lenny catches and effortlessly crushes Curly's swinging fist, just completely shatters it. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the trap. Conclusion. That transition from total passivity to extreme violence was blindingly fast, and it leaves George in a brilliant moral gray area. Slim forces Curly to accept a machine accident alibi to protect their jobs, but the underlying reality is fully exposed. We are witnessing Steinbeck's psychological trap. He is taking humanity's absolute best, most devoted bond, and dropping it into a societal machine meticulously designed to crush it. George initiated the defense. He acted as the trigger, but he was utterly powerless to stop the destructive force of nature that he unleashed. We've seen how George and Lenny's desperately necessary bond is violently incompatible with a society that purely discards the weak. Which leaves us with this final, lingering question. Can loyalty truly protect against a world with no place for the weak? Bringing it full circle to George's very first rule, we're left to wonder if it's only a matter of time before Lenny's panic forces him to run back to that river. Keep that in the back of your mind the next time you find yourself trying to protect something fragile in a really harsh world.